Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to this short series of autumn EdTech vodcasts. My name is Bruce Wilson and I'm an educational technologist within the United Learning technology team. And currently I'm also acting up and co-leading the department, specifically our work on digital strategy for United Learning schools and the work that we do as part of the demonstrator schools program for all other schools. So welcome. This autumn series is designed to provide just a little bit more guidance and advice around the various sections of our digital strategy toolkit. And in a minute, just before we get going substantially on today's content, I'll just do a little reminder about where you can find that, whether you're a United Learning school or indeed one of the schools more broadly on the DFE's Demonstrator Schools program. So for a reminder, for those of you that haven't accessed that or don't know too much about that, this essentially is a collection of resources that we've produced internally, but also made available externally to provide a bit of a framework, a bit of a toolkit, if you will, so that schools can write and construct their own digital strategy in their own toolkit. There's a variety of things in the toolkit itself. Ultimately, it's designed to be self-service and for schools to walk themselves through it. We hope there's everything you need within there to plan and write your own digital strategy. So just before I hand over to today's guest, I just wanted to do a bit of a reminder from the first podcast about where you might find that. So if you just bear with me a second, I'm going to use Teams here just to kind of share my screen. Dan, can you just let me know that you're seeing something?
That's come through.
Brilliant. Firstly, this is firstly for United Learning schools. If you're a United Learning school, you'll be very familiar with United Hub. That's our internal resource sharing, our SharePoint site. You can basically go straight in, go to the search on the homepage. If you do a search for digital strategy or a digital strategy toolkit for schools, you will get to this page here. We spent a lot of time advertising this early on, so I won't go through all of the detail. But the important bit, if you scroll down, you'll get to the document stack here. If you're not a United Learning school and you're working with us or working with any of the demonstrators on the DFE's EdTech Demonstrator program, we've also made the toolkit available to other schools as well. We felt that was an important thing to do. So the way to go about that is if you go to the EdTech Demonstrator program, so that's edtechdemo.ucst.uk, edtechdemo.ucst.uk. And then if you follow the links to the resources tab there, and it's quite near the top because it's still quite new. If you go to the digital strategy toolkit and click on that link there, you will get to that, which is a bit of a sort of flash contents page, really. Just to say, it's got everything by way of each document that we have on our internal site. So we just needed an internal mechanism to kind of share that around. So that's the place to find it. If you are a United Learning school, we're going to put all the recordings of all of these vodcasts up on this site as well. So for example, here's the first one we did last week or the week before, a couple of weeks ago, and that was all about leadership and expected milestones. And again, if you are not a United Learning school and want to watch these podcasts back, we hope you find them useful. The place to find that is on the EdTech Demonstrator community, which is very easily found, and you should all know about that if you're involved in that program. So you can see there that I've posted a recording of the first podcast and all of the final podcasts that are coming up. So we're doing number 2 today. There are going to be 3 and 4 before we break up for the Christmas holidays. So I'm gonna stop sharing there, and my role today really is not to talk too much about that, but to introduce our guest. So I'm happy to introduce Dan Bunker. Dan sits on my team within the United Learning Educational Technologies team. So welcome, Dan. Before we get started on today's episode, you just want to introduce yourself. What's your role within the team and your background in EdTech?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. As you said, my name's Dan Bunker and I work for United Learning as an educational technologist. I've worked there for quite a long time now, coming up for a long service medal, I'm sure. But previous to that, I did work for Promethean as a kind of a similar sort of, advisory role for schools. And before that, I was in the classroom, worked my way up to deputy head. We eventually had a 486 computer from RM delivered, and I was immediately kind of involved in that. And from there, I kind of got involved in some teacher training work with Anglia Ruskin University and kind of worked with EdTech ever since, basically. And the last couple of years, obviously, I've been helping with the kind of shift to the cloud, doing quite a bit with Microsoft, getting some of their accreditations like their Microsoft expert badges and so on and so forth. But I'm also quite keen on keeping diverse in terms of the infrastructure we use, and I like working with Apple and apps as well. So yeah, fairly broad, but mainly based in primary, Bruce.
Thank you, Dan. And just to say, the format of these vodcasts, if you will, the first one we sort of pre-recorded by way of a little taster, but we're going to keep a similar format. So for today, for example, I'm going to interview Dan, and Dan's going to give us his view on a particular section of the digital strategy toolkit. It happens to be one that he's written himself and has inputted lots of that expertise into it. We have got a live audience on this one, so welcome to those of you that have joined either from a United Learning school or from outside. I can see a couple of people from outside, so you're very, very welcome. We're going to do this sort of in two sections. So the first section is interview style, where I'm going to interview Dan, but we will at that point unmute you and allow you to use your cameras at the end, and happy to take any questions from wherever school you're at. So you're very, very welcome to join us this morning. So Dan, let's get started. The first vodcast, for those that have either watched it or will get to it, was all about the first section of the toolkit, which was all about leadership and governance and sort of planning and milestones. So I understand for this morning, you're going to talk about the second section. So we've called that auditing the current state. Can you just start with just sort of showing us where to find that, and just give us a bit of an overview of what that's all about and why it's there?
Yeah, just let me share my screen, get that window sorted out. So hopefully you're seeing that now. We're back on the page where you showed us on the hub. Obviously, it will look slightly different to our externals through the demonstrator site, but the content is the same, just arranged slightly differently. And audit is this section here in green on the wheel, but obviously comes after the vision and planning stuff. And it's really an opportunity to, just as Bruce was saying, audit your current state. Where are we now? What have we got? How old is it? When will it need replacing? How much will it cost? They're some of the kind of the key questions that you'll be thinking about in this section. But it isn't just the technical audit, but it's kind of auditing where we are with quite a few other things as well. So we've got the section here, Bruce, is section B, auditing the current state. And you'll see there's a number of subsections to it, which we'll talk through during today. Perhaps if I just talk about this one first, Bruce, the audit overview. The idea of here, really, it's a relatively short section, but it just kind of gives you the headlines, really. What are you doing in this section? What are you going to get out of it in terms of output? And these all link here to a couple of documents, which, just to save time, I've kind of opened. So this one is B1. It just tells you what it is you're doing, the context to this, and it has the objectives and the hardware audit. So this is it just gives you that kind of overview, perhaps for a leader or somebody who's just coming into this fresh, thinking, what am I going to do in this section? And it just kind of summarizes for you what's in the section. And that kind of related document, again, this is just useful, quick summary for people. What have I got to do in the various sections? What is the output from that activity? And sometimes there isn't an output, it's more just a review, but we are going to produce a technical audit and maybe a CPD plan and so on. So it just gives you that kind of overview of what the whole kind of audit unit is about.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And so for those of you that have either picked up this toolkit internally, if you're UL or indeed externally, you're going to find a very, very similar structure in all of the sections A through E. We've tried to, right at the start in A1 or B1 or C1, so on and so forth, take the same kind of structure, so that before you delve into it, leaders particularly, and this has been written for a non-technical leadership audience, so that leaders are really, really clear on essentially what they have to do and why it's there. We were very keen when we were designing this toolkit and putting it together over the summer that it wasn't just a pie in the sky, that there was some tangible output to all of this work, and that builds up to actually the final vodcast and the final section, which is actually a practical operational kind of written plan. But all of the other sections do have bits within it that require some work to be done. So it's not all visioning. It's a very kind of practical very practical tool. So thanks for that, Dan. So let's jump into a few of the sections. I mean, maybe look at B2 and B3. So I noticed when I was going through it that the toolkit mentions technical assurance, which is a very United Learning term. But do you want to just talk a little bit about that? What it is, what's its significance for leaders, and perhaps if there are people on the call or watching the video that aren't part of the group, what sort of things might they be expecting from their technical teams by way of hardware audit?
Yes, certainly. So this section B2, existing hardware audits, kind of recognises that we're not necessarily starting in the dark. We've got some idea of what our technical equipment is, and each school will have its own various strategies for checks and balances on what's going on with their IT and their hardware. So we have, as United Learning, our own kind of check and balance. It's called technical assurance, and it just really helps us understand where schools are in terms of not just their hardware, but the systems they operate. Is their antivirus up to date? Are they a secure, organization? Because, obviously we want to make sure our schools, look after their security, the privacy, and all those kind of things, as well as keeping an eye on the hardware and the software and the licensing situation. So we have this system called technical assurance, where teams from a related technology department, technology specialists who know a bit more about the technical goings on in schools than I do, have a look and talk through with network managers or IT support leads the systems that are in place. And through that process, they produce a report which kind of summarizes where we are. And we do have, example reports. I'll pull one up here and just sort of scroll down. This is a summary, basically, of our internal technical assurance, the type of report that is produced. And this isn't the full kind of experience that the schools get, but it's just a quick summary for perhaps line managers or school leaders to read, just to get a rough idea of the state of the nation in terms of their IT. But you can see this one, it does maybe mention some things that will go into our technical audit, our hardware audit. But it says here, teacher desktops need replacing. Well, that's going to go into our digital strategy, isn't it? Servers require, so there could be all sorts of things that crop up in technical assurance that are already there and will automatically feed into your kind of long-term refresh strategy. So that's what we do. Other schools outside of the group no doubt will have systems of reporting, but we've already got one, and the idea of mentioning it here is that anybody involved in leading on the digital strategy will want to have a reference, go and have a look at their technical assurance reports. It might give them some clues as to what that they need to think about as part of their long-term plan. Now, that technical assurance isn't all you're going to need. You are going to need a little bit of counting and looking at devices when they're going to be replaced. The technical assurance isn't a full audit of all your equipment, but it's a kind of a highlight, if you like. But the next section, if I can go on to that, Bruce, is sure. The summary kind of IT audit, and this is really for just a guide. It's a form that allows schools to just open up a form, and we've made it as a kind of a link to the form in this document here. But basically, you can see in the screenshot here, we've got a form here where schools can go through. It'll ask them the age of their server, when it needs replacing, how much that's likely to cost, what about your switches, what about basically all the hardware elements that you've got in the school are covered in this form, and the output of that is a quite detailed list of all the equipment. It's a rough estimate of when it will need replacing, and if known, likely costs as well. So that's going to be a really useful kind of output for anyone leading on a digital strategy, to get that kind of complete overview of the kind of the devices and the hardware infrastructure in your school. So that's all in this section here, technical audit form. You'll be able to duplicate that form. It's just part of Microsoft Forms, which those of you who are using Office 365 will be familiar with. It just creates your own duplicate, so you can edit the questions. At your school, you may have some other aspects that you want to include in your audit. And it is going to be largely led, the audit, by the technical teams in schools. They're the ones who will be able to advise the digital strategy lead on the age of the server, if it, when it's going to need replacing, what about your switches. We're not expecting our kind of digital leaders to know that, but our technical teams hopefully will, or certainly can look into it and do the necessary research. So that's really all the nuts and bolts here of what you've got on the ground. I think the other thing I want to say here, Bruce, just before we move on, is the idea of the technical audit doesn't mean you're necessarily going to replace everything like for like, but you need to know what you've got and when it's due for renewal. And then, as we'll come on to another section on another vodcast, what are you going to replace it with? But the important thing is when, from this section is, when are you going to need to replace that particular item of kit?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dan. And just to reiterate, I think we've got a mixture of United Learning people on this webinar and some externals. So we are showing our internal site, but if you're picking up this toolkit and these resources via the EdTech Demonstrator program, is exactly the same kind of content. You might find that we're using terms that we use internally, like technical assurance, but nevertheless, the resources for leaders we would expect to apply right across the board. And one of the things we were really keen on when we were kind of pulling this toolkit together is to more so than ever get leaders, and particularly leaders of teaching and learning, in that sort of triangular sort of effective working relationship with technical colleagues and indeed business colleagues, because on a podcast later on in the series we are going to look at financial planning, and so important, that triangle of people, teaching and learning, technical and business people, business ops people, come together for any successful digital strategy. That's really important, and it's one of the reasons why all of this stuff is all in one place, really. So yeah. So Dan, so being technically secure, having that sort of solid bedrock of infrastructure is so important to digital strategy. There would be no point, for example, of doing anything with mobile devices if that wasn't in place. So, we can't expect senior leaders, can we, to understand all of the technical kind of jargon. Have you got sort of what are the key areas to kind of focus on, even if it's asking challenging non-technical questions? Could you summarize sort of the key things to get right?
Yeah, certainly. That kind of wireless element is one that we found if we don't get that right, it really affects your implementation. Now, in our group, we've kind of been we've been investing heavily in Chromebooks, for example. Part of our response really to the pandemic and making sure children can continue their learning was to try and supply them with devices where they didn't have access. And our kind of default way of doing that was by using Chromebooks. Now, one of the issues is we had to do that because children are at home, they need to keep learning. Now they're back in school, we will face a challenge because to a certain extent we've put the cart before the horse. We've got the Chromebooks. There may be certain schools where the wireless infrastructure, frankly, isn't really up to having 30 Chromebooks in a classroom, all attaching it to it. So as a school leader, you're really thinking about, I've got this vision. I want, and the vision, let's face it, isn't I want a cracking wireless system in my school. It's I want the children using devices, being creative, independent, supporting their learning. But unfortunately, one won't work, without the other. So without getting the wireless infrastructure right, then the Chromebooks, the iPads, whatever the devices aren't really going to function in the way that you want to. So in terms of a school leader, it's saying, well, what do we need underneath, our kind of top vision of what everyone's doing? What do we need to support that? And they may not necessarily know the specification of the wireless, or we need a high density access point in the hall because we want 100 children or parents to come to an event where they could be connecting to our systems. They don't need that level, but they just need to be aware that there are certain things like the wireless in particular, but there could be other things, like switches, and to a certain extent there may be server things that they need to address. So it's really just understanding that beneath the surface there's this core infrastructure that we need to get right, and it's not necessarily cheap, and it's not necessarily a quick fix. Because it's quite disruptive to update your infrastructure, to run new cables, to put access points in, etc. It might have to wait till a holiday period before that can be done, and obviously you need the finances there to do the work. So it is important, and the way we've looked at it is it's step one in a way. Get this audit done, work out what needs doing, and then address those issues first as your foundation, if you like, to in terms of the hardware to build on that.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So this is so important. I was reflecting back when I was a middle and a senior leader, and this was one of the areas that I found really, really challenging, despite a background and interest in tech and some time in industry, and I think the heart of the problem is that as leaders of teaching and learning, we don't necessarily understand the language, but nevertheless, it is important we make that connection. So I think if leaders stick to, those key issues of, internet speed, input and failover, the specification of the network, just is it going to be fast enough? And I think you've pulled out that sort of wireless speed there, Dan, quite rightfully. If schools are doing anything with mobile devices, either for staff or students or both, it's just got to work. Otherwise, that will form the bedrock. And we know what staff are like. When things don't work, they're going to give up because lessons have got to continue. But as you rightfully say, I think leaders don't need to understand all of the technical jargon, but hopefully there's some things in the toolkit. And I'll get you just to open up baseline spec and talk a little bit about that now. Hopefully there's some things in the toolkit that can really just prompt leaders to ask questions of technical leads. Are we doing this? Can you show me? Is it going to be fast enough? Those kind of fundamentals, rather than, as you say, kind of understanding the technical language. So yeah, let's just jump into the baseline spec. What's this all about, Dan, and what have we got in here?
Yeah, this was just really trying to kind of come up with a level playing field, because schools rightly want to think about the end game. They want to think about the kit and the experiences for the children and the young learners in their school, but it can be quite complicated in knowing, what device do we want? What specification is it? So we've tried to take some of the guesswork out of it by saying, well, if we're going to buy a desktop PC for a teacher to use, then the baseline, i.e. the lowest specification we want to do is an i5 processor, 8 gigabytes of RAM, and a 240 gig solid state drive. That isn't particularly a high spec, but it's one that we don't want to go below. And we have had cases recently where schools are just trying to kind of economize, and I totally understand why that is. And they may be, offered something that looks like a great value deal, maybe a refurbished model, or maybe something that on the surface looks good, but when you look at the specification, it's below our baseline, i.e. it wouldn't upgrade to, say, Windows 11. So we don't want to be buying kit now that in 3 years' time is going to be obsolete because we've had to move on to another system. So the idea of the baseline spec is really kind of a safety net, so schools don't go ahead and buy the wrong kind of equipment that isn't going to provide value for money, isn't going to provide a long life. Now, I know schools that have got good technical support and good network managers, etc. They'll know this automatically, and there won't be anything new in this baseline spec. But I'm particularly thinking of those schools that don't have, the luxury of a full-time IT manager or network manager who sometimes have to make very quick decisions about things and don't perhaps know the right kind of specifications and jargon. So the idea of this is it just kind of gives a pointer, what kind of specification, and helpfully what type of cost is it going to be, because one of the things in the digital strategy is we need to price things out. It's no good having a huge wish list which you haven't costed in any way, which then becomes unsustainable because you just simply haven't got that amount of funding to keep going with it. So the idea of the baseline spec is really just to help schools, particularly schools where they haven't got a lot of technical support, making sure they come up with the appropriate specification of kit, basically.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dan. So again, if you're that non-technical leader, which most of us are, let's be honest, you could use that document as nothing more than, where are we with wireless? Does it meet this specification? Where are we with internet? Have we got a fast enough pipe? So that's a sort of conversation starter, I think. So conscious of time, Dan, that's a good half an hour-ish almost on sort of technical audit, but obviously, auditing the current state is not just about the technical bits, is it? So I noticed towards the end here, there's kind of two more sections, one on staff skills and CPD, and one on pupil voice. So perhaps we could spend just a wee bit more time before we take questions on those sections. So starting with B5 then, which is you've entitled this staff skills audit and CPD planning. What's in there, please? And why is that there? What's the purpose?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, why is it there? It's really just to help schools understand where their staff are at in terms of their own skills and confidence, because if we think back to our overall vision and plan for our digital strategy, we're going to need the staff very much on side and able and capable to deliver it. So we need to be aware that staff aren't all coming from the same level. Some staff will be very confident in using the platforms that and the workflows that the school have implemented. Other staff may be less so. So it's just really working out where our CPD input needs to target. So there may be some annual refresh. You may have some new teachers coming in who haven't been familiar with the Office 365 platform. You may have chosen that as your workflow. You're using, I don't know, let's say Teams and Teams assignments. If we're going to have that as part of our digital strategy, then obviously we need to make sure the teachers are capable and confident of using it. So the idea of that is very much like the other audit in that it's a form. This will just take you to a link to a form. But again, it's customizable. You can ask the questions that are most relevant for your staff, and basically that will enable you to carry out an audit and then kind of analyze that and work out what your CPD inputs are. So, following on from that, we've got a summary CPD plan. This will look different in different schools. Some schools may have their own a CPD plan for all subjects and a fairly detailed rolling program. Others may have a CPD plan just for the kind of digital strategy. It depends on how it is. Here's an example one we did earlier where we kind of looked at the various audits and analyzed the results. Can you use Office 365 apps effectively, and so on. So there's all sorts of different questions here which you can customize. And then at the very end of that, it's, well, so what? What we need to do is to develop a plan to address the core issues. And it may be that all staff need to refresh about cloud storage, use of OneDrive. Maybe for this particular school they were using iPads. Can they use them effectively for video editing? Do we need an input on that? And so each school will be different depending on the particular device mix that they have and the workflows that they're using. But we mustn't just assume that staff can automatically use these. So we have to put in place appropriate support. And the interesting thing here is the timing of that kind of input. So there'll be a temptation maybe to, I don't know, get all the CPD done in 1 year or something. But, if you're implementing, let's say we're going to have a new refresh on Chromebooks and we're going to use Chromebooks for workflow in Office 365, then, before we start all that, it would be appropriate just in time to do some training on, how to use that particular platform. So it's not just about the plan, it's about implementing it, at the right time so it supports staff. And there is a blank template there, just if it's a table basically, but it might just help you start, what we're doing. So do you want to say anything on that, or shall I quickly go on to the next one?
Just before you show us the last point, I think just to expand on the point you've made about timing there, it's so important. I think the other point on timing is we should be conscious of where we are in terms of staff skills, in terms of the pandemic, right? Because one of the reasons why we've put this all together and we've driven this strategy as the group is, I think, more so than ever, we almost want to engage with almost the moral imperative of just making sure no child is left behind sort of digitally, not for another pandemic, but just kind of for business as usual. But I think before we look at the last section, the other point I wanted to make on timing is that, and specifically on staff skills, is that, we're doing a lot of work on how the skills staff have learned for remote learning and for pandemic mode, if you will, transfer back into the classroom, because fundamentally those two things, whilst staff have been awesome at doing that and have learned a lot in some cases in such a short space of time with new tools, but the two modes are fundamentally different. So we shouldn't just assume, for example, because people can use Zoom or Meets or Teams really, really well in a remote sense, that those skills are automatically transferred back into what we're trying to achieve in the classroom and with the kit that we've got in the classroom, because they might fundamentally be two different things. So I don't have a magic answer to that, but we do need to address that kind of that as an issue. All right, Dan, conscious of time, let's have a quick look at the last section. So I know you've put a final section there on pupil voice. So just, yeah, if you could just spend a few minutes just walking us through that bit, again, why it's there, what it's trying to achieve.
Yeah, again, it's part of auditing the current state, but it's very easy to kind of overlook pupils in all of this. We know all about the hardware that we want to put in and the infrastructure and that kind of thing, but I think it's really important to cross-reference what children think, what the pupils think as well, get their views, and that might be on the access to devices, it might be their use out beyond school and to support their learning. And again, I think it's useful for leaders just to have a litmus test really at various stages. So before they launch their digital strategy based around whatever device mix that they think is appropriate, well, let's get some views from children. What do they use technology for, and what are their opinions and thoughts on it? It doesn't mean to say we're driven by that, but they're obviously an important stakeholder, so we want to get their views. We want to get their views before we do things, but also whilst we're doing them. So when we're implementing a change as part of our digital strategy, let's check in with them. Let's find out, are we using technology appropriately for them? Can they access work independently? Are they using the workflows that we think they're using? Because it's very easy just to assume things are happening. We've got it in our digital strategy. Let's assume everything's okay. It's probably better to check in every so often via a pupil survey. And this is just another example form. It'll just be the same. It'll be a link to it. And you can see here there's those kind of Likert type questions. There's a whole range of different questions that are a starting point, but you will may want to customize for your own particular pupil voice survey. United Learning, those of you who work for United Learning, we're familiar with surveys, and we're always checking in. We're always trying to find out what people think. So I think it's in line with our values that before we do any major change, or whilst we're implementing a change, we check with our pupils and make sure that they have a voice in this. It's not just done to them, but they are part of the process, so they get feedback into it, and we listen to find out what's working for them and what we could do better for them. So that's why it's in there. Again, the timing of that isn't necessarily at the same time you do the technical audit. It will depend on where you are on this cycle. We're not all starting at the same place. But there will be times, and it's probably more than once, that you'll want to kind of check in with pupils just to get their views. It's not something you're necessarily going to do every year, but you could perhaps do it 3 times in a 5-year cycle, for example, to get some really good feedback from children about, and young learners about, how this is working out for them in practice.
Great, that's brilliant, Dan. So listen, thank you so much for that. So for those of you watching live on the webinar, just before I unmute you all and allow to ask some questions, let me just thank Dan again. We hope you found that really, really useful. As I said in my introductory remarks, this is, I think, the second of 4 of these that we're going to do before Christmas. Dan, sorry, can you just put the toolkit back up again, just whilst I close off. So there already is a live recording, thanks, on that first section there, section A, leadership and governance, that what we did last week, and we'll post the recording of this one so colleagues in and around the country can watch it. But let me just give you the dates and times of the next 2. So the next one will be around, as Dan scrolls down there, section C. This is a really, really important section, classroom and device refresh. So there's a webinar coming up next Tuesday, the 30th of November. Again, it's going to be a midday. again, we're going to do it this style with a bit of an interview, a good deep dive into that section, and some questions at the end. So Dan will be the host of that, and my colleague Gemma Gwilliam, who's also on our team and who wrote this section, will be presenting on that. And then before we finish the term on the Monday, the 6th of December, this one's actually at 1 o'clock, slightly later. So again, I'll be back hosting a webinar on the section D that Dan's got open there. And again, Dan will be just presenting some resources on, as he said during the thing, you know, all well and good, all this planning, but how do you make it? How do we afford it, and how do you make that financial planning work, and how do we make this all sustainable? So just wanted to give a plug for those ones. We'll do them the same style with a live webinar recorded, and the chance for Q&A again. And again, anyone from United Learning or anyone outside of United Learning working with the DFE on their EdTech demonstrator program, you're more than welcome to join us. We do hope this toolkit is self-sustaining, can be used by itself, but we just wanted to provide a little bit more explanation on all of the kind of sections. So we've still got some remaining time. We have got some live guests today. I have now enabled your cameras and your mics. I think the chat will work as well. So you have Dan particularly, who's the expert in this section, for another 15 minutes, or you're welcome to switch any of those things on and ask us any questions. Primarily, I guess, about what you've just seen, the auditing the current state, but if there are any questions about any of the other sections, maybe about the one we did last week, yeah, happy to take any questions. I will take stunned silences as you don't have any, but yeah, you're welcome to pick our brains for the remaining time. This is the point, Dan, where we either get loads or no.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be also just interesting to hear from people on the call about where they are with, you know, this particular aspect, the audit section. Is it something that they've already started, or is it something where they'll find these sort of templates particularly useful? Just interesting to hear where they are.
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, one of the things I said to heads within our group, and it's an open offer really, is that we think this is quite good, but feedback is important. At the end of the day, it's got to work for your schools in your context. So if there are things that you feel could be improved, or if you feel the things that aren't here that really ought to be there, then, you know, in our plan for the rest of the year, you know, it's definitely the intention to grow this and to improve it as necessary. I was literally on the line, Dan, to one of our schools in the Manchester area before this call. He'd used your form but added some bits into it as well, and I just asked him to kind of share it, because there was some quite useful. He's going to keep all your questions, but there's some quite useful additional stuff that he's added from his perspective, particularly sort of I think staff's attitudinal responses towards technology as well as their skills. So, you know, happy to receive those and to kind of share them both internally and externally, because I can't help but think that the questions he would ask would also apply to people, you know, in similar circumstances. So yeah, happy to do that. Okay, well, look, it's 10 to 1. Question coming in on the chat. Let's read that out. So, sorry, I should have had the chat open. And of course, Teams is running slow there. Dan, have you got that at your end?
Yeah,
oh, I've got it now.
Yeah. That's no, it's more of an update from Imogen, really, saying the technical manager head and herself have audited the classrooms 2 weeks ago, so they've made a good start on the audit, and that seems a good place to start. Look at the classroom to begin with, and then no doubt somewhere your technical manager will be able to open some cupboards where you just don't normally go, and tell you what's in there and when it needs replacing and all sorts of things. So yeah, I think that's a really good starting point. Start with the visible and then start finding out what's behind the scenes and what's in those other areas that you wouldn't normally be aware of.
Couldn't agree more, Dan. And I'm really passionate about this piece, and more on this on the next podcast on Section C. But, we shouldn't lose sight of the history of lots of the classrooms we're trying to refresh here. Very often some of these are sort of 7, 8, 9, 10 years old in some cases, and back in the day we were going through a point where interactive whiteboards particularly were booming on the market, weren't they? And and it was a sort of almost a default position that we'd moved from a dry whiteboard to this sort of digital version of and they've had lots of success in some places, less so in others. But the main point I want to challenge in this section is that it was just the digital version of what we did before, and is that right? And the other point is, did anyone from a teaching and learning background have input into what went into the classroom? And I suspect in lots of cases the answer's kind of no. And in my mind, that's bonkers, because we've got to get teachers ideally, but leaders of teaching and learning to have certainly an equal, if not greater, voice in the design moving forward, because ultimately these are classrooms for teachers to teach students. So the ed tech has got to match their aspirations. And that conversation's not got to be led by whatever's bolted to the wall. So, yeah, really important that we audit the current state of play, including staff's skills and attitudes, but that flows into the next section, which is, what comes next. So, an important moment in time where, more so than ever because of pandemic, teachers have all experienced in one shape or fashion the value of this stuff, and I think they have a very loud voice at the moment, and rightfully so, in terms of designing classrooms moving forward. Just noticing Duncan is typing, so I'll just pause for thought. I'm never quite sure whether people type slow or are typing a lot, or are you going to email out the link for this one? Yes, absolutely, Duncan. So it will, if Dan just scrolls up a little bit, so we will broadcast the recording, but I'm putting all the recordings in this useful link section for UL schools, so that's where they'll go. But we'll let you know. And if you're a DSP school, I'm putting them on the EdTech demonstrator community as well. So that's where we'll let you know. I'll try and get it off my desk today. If not, it'll be tomorrow. And obviously, if you're a UL school and you want to pick up with one of the team, you should know who your educational technologist is. But if not, either come to me and I'll let you know, or there is a list in the toolkit as well. So yeah, we'll do that. And I think I'm probably going to speak to our network managers meeting in the morning as well. So I'll let you know where it is. Absolutely. He's saying thanks very much. Okay. Well, look, thank you so much for those of you who joined us live. Thanks again to Dan for a really expert view on that section. As I said, more vodcasts to follow in the build up to Christmas. We hope you're finding this toolkit useful, whether you're one of our schools or out or inside. And do stay in touch, particularly on that feedback thing. So we'll finish there. Enjoy the rest of your day and look out for the recording. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Bruce.